This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to the SWK Technologies Empower Virtual Conference 2021. This is Sage 100 Tips and Tricks, and I'm Bruce Kern. I'm going to share some tips with you today on how to automate the update of journals and registers with a single click of a button from any module in Sage other than the GL. We're going to also expose you to the task scheduler and show you how you can use that to automate some otherwise manual tasks in Sage. We have a very fun feature to show you about how you can have a single custom report on a menu, but have that report behave very differently depending on the company that you run the report from. And lastly, we're going to do some customizations to add a quality inspector ID for a lot and serial number type of an item, flow that through the system and be able to see that information in a lot recall scenario. With that said, let's get started. So everywhere in Sage, or Mass 90 and Mass 200 if you go back far enough, there's a two-step update process when you're updating journals and registers from any module except the general ledger. For example, if you were in the accounts receivable module and you were doing a cash receipt, you would first run the cash receipt journal, and then you would be prompted to run the daily transaction register. This is the two-step process that I'm referring to. Now, this daily transaction register is the one that sends the dollars over to the general ledger. So essentially it's the general ledger transaction register, but we call it the daily transaction register. Now, if you were in sales order, for example, you would first run a batch of invoices by getting the daily sales reports and updates done first, and then again, you would run the daily transaction register. The original intent of this two-step update process was to give the end user an opportunity to see the GL codes and dollars coming in before they actually hit the GL in case they see a mistake. The flaw with this logic is that once a journal is halfway updated, any correction that the user would have to make would have to be done post-mortem anyway. The journal still has to be updated even if there's a mistake. The other problem that we sometimes see with this two-step update process usually happens around month end. We get a call that goes something like this. My AR trial balance reconciled to my AR control account in my general ledger last month, but it's off now. It looks like my AR has the transactions, but something seems to be missing from my general ledger. Sometimes what's happened is one or more of these daily transaction registers just didn't get updated for some reason. So our first tip is going to be, how do we automate the update of these journals and registers to just be a single click? Most of the time, people do just want these updates to go all the way through completely. So we'll go over to Library Master, Role Maintenance, and we're going to pull up our Accounting Manager role. And our first tip is going to be that we can use the search button in Sage 100C to navigate the otherwise what feels like a needle in a haystack, sometimes finding a module option to turn something on. So we don't know where this feature might be, but we do know it's the daily transaction register. So I'm just going to type that, and we'll hit the enter button, see what we find. Now it found 21 matches for daily transaction, and the very first one we can see refers to something called the allow the automatic update of the daily transaction register. That's actually what we're looking for. But notice it's a separate opportunity to do that in every module. So if I scroll down here to the sales order one, this is the one we're looking for to do it for our invoice batch in sales order. So we'll go ahead and highlight that. We'll click the OK button. And then by using that search feature and locating the item we want, it takes us right to the spot in the role maintenance to allow or make a change to that permission. So in this case, all I'd have to do is check the box and click accept, and the accounting manager role would then be updated and be able to do that update with a single click of a button. Now I'm not going to go ahead and update that at this point. I'm using this role here for my user, which already has the permission selected. So we're going to go ahead and see if it works now. Okay, in the sales order module here, we have an invoice kind of planted in here already. So we're just going to go ahead and kick off the update of the daily sales reports and updates. Now, normally, of course, we would print the invoices and maybe we'd electronically deliver them, But in this case, we're not really showing that, and we don't have time to do that whole process. So we'll hit print here, and we'll wait for our paperless office to come up. And Sage is going to warn us that we didn't print those invoices. That's okay. There's our paperless journal. It looks good to me. So we're going to proceed with the update. So we're going to click yes, and this should be the only time the user has to click it with the permissions that we have turned on. As you can see, it just ran the daily sales reports and updates. Now up comes the daily transaction register automatically. And it's run through its paces and it completed the update. So it seems to have worked fine. Let's just make sure by double checking in our general ledger by drilling down on one of the accounts involved in the transaction. Let's pick on the AR account. So this is the AR control account where the dollars come into the general ledger for the customer that we just dealt with in our transaction. We're going to come over here to the transactions tab, go to the very last one that we just did, and that was an invoice for only $2.23. We'll just drill down on that and see that we actually have the timestamp from just now, which happens to be 8:27 local time. So the feature worked beautifully. All right, moving on to our next feature. Now in Sage, there's a task scheduler under Library Master Main. And we can use the task scheduler to do a number of different things. So I'm going to just type an X here and talk about some of the fields at first. Now, what we've got here is we give a task a name, we give it a description, you provide the company code information and some credentials to the system so that it can actually do this unattended. You'll set a schedule for this particular job, which can be daily, weekly, monthly, or once. As you can see, you can put a date range on this and you'll give it a time when the task should kick off. Now, what are the things you could actually use this to do? You can do a journal and a register, which means you can update any journals and registers in Sage unattended. So that's one thing you can do. You can run system reports. You can do visual integrator import jobs, or you can do other. Whatever you pick on the category here on the type depends on what shows up on the number 2 task tab. So for example, if I picked reports, for example, I could come over here to my task tab, pick a module, and I would see the list of reports available that I could run with this task. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna do one where we're gonna try to automate a journal entry. So we're not gonna save that. And we're gonna go ahead and pull one up that we have in here. And this is one we've got set up to bring in a visual integrator job. And this one was set for 8:30, which is right now. Here is our tasks. So here's where I assign the VI job. And with all of these import jobs, you can actually add multiple rows. So if you're running reports, you could run any number of reports. You just add them to the grid. If you're running import jobs, you can import more than one job. You just add them to the grid and so on. Okay, so and I'll just mention the other type here. An example of what you might do there is you could use that to run a utility. So like the build search index, you could have that run at night, refresh those indexes for your end users. All right, well, let's see if we have a journal entry, if this worked or not. First thing we're gonna do is check the log and see if we have a log that refers to today's date and timestamp as indicating that the job thinks it ran. So today is the 26th, and we do see that there's a timestamp right at 8:30, which is right now, and it told us basically that that kicked off at 8:30, and just a little after 8:30 and 0.02 seconds. It was done, it looks like after about 3 seconds. So we're going to go check the import results now. It looks like it worked. But let's go over to the general ledger and see if we actually have an import job in there with our data in it. So here's our general journal entry. And let's see if we have anything. We do. And sure enough, it came right in at that 8:30 and 2 seconds timestamp with today's date on it. And we'll go ahead and take a look at the entry. Okay, so in this case, I set the import job up to tell me that it was imported with the Visual Integrator module. And here's my actual entry with my transactions and dollars in them. So it worked great. All right, so another cool thing that you might want to think of using the task scheduler for is you can combine this to do different things. So imagine if you had one task scheduler job that brought in a transaction like I did with my general journal entry, and then maybe you had another one that was scheduled to update the journal and register for the transaction that got imported. Now you have to be careful with this kind of automation because it doesn't relieve you from the responsibility of validating the results of those transactions or checking to make sure that the dollars and cents were accurate. But it is a way to add some power to the system. Still, another way you might use this is you could have the same import job, but have it set to run on 5 different schedules with 5 different tasks at different times during the day. Just a thought. All right, our next tip that we're going to show you today is a fun one. So, in Sage 100, you can do crystal reports. You can make custom reports, and if you can add those custom reports to your menu. That's not our tip. We're just going to explore that a little bit deeper today. So over here on the account receivable, we've created a custom report, and we're going to go ahead and just run the report to show you what it is kind of before and then after. So here we go. Pretty basic report. There's no report title even. It's just header row with some data, and you can kind of see what it is. Very basic report. Now it doesn't matter what company we run that report from. So if I go over here to my XYZ and I run the same report, I'll literally get the same layout. Whoops, we clicked the wrong button. We'll get the exact same layout, but with the other company's data. It's literally using the same crystal file, so it does the same thing every time, regardless of where you run the report. Let's add some power to that. So over here, what we have, is how that works. If we take a look, we'll go into the behind the scenes here, into our Mass 90 folder, which is the parent folder for the whole system, if you have standard or advanced. And when you add a custom report to a menu, part of the technique involves having that report named custom.rpt at the end. So this is the actual crystal file that we brought in and just looked at. So what I did here is I made a variation of this report, and I saved that with the same file name, and I just put it over here. And I'm going to copy that report now. So it's identical report minus my changes. And I'm going to put that under my company code. So AO3 is the company we're in. I'm going to put that under the AO3 reports folder, just like so. Now, I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Crystal so you can actually see what's different about this report. So this is the identical report that we just saw in the menu, except I added the logo and I added a title. That's it. Same exact thing. So I could have made any number of changes. It could have been a wildly different report, but it's got the same file name and I put it in that particular location. That's the secret. All right, once I do that, then I can come back to my AO3 here. And I can see that report's still there, and I'm going to go ahead and run it now. But we should see some cosmetic differences. And there it is. So with this technique, you can actually have the custom report behave differently depending on where you place a copy of the file in the company code folder. So very easy to see the cosmetic changes there. Very cool. Now that's nice because I could have had 2 reports on my menu, but now I only need 1 and the report's dynamic and it behaves differently just depending on where I ran it from. If I ran that from the XYZ, it would not have those changes in it. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to try to get through the custom office piece here. So what we've done here is a lot recall scenario, and we wanted to capture the ID of the quality inspector that inspected the goods at the time we received them at PO, receiving. So what we did here is we went into the custom office into user-defined field and table maintenance, and we added a custom field. So we're just going to show you the field in some of the tables, and then we'll do an example of the receiving and try to show you some reports. So in this case, the starting point of the capture is going to be at the PO receipt. Now we're going to be dealing with a lot and or a serial number item. So we literally want to know who inspected each lot of the item. So if I come into this table here, we'll see the starting point. I called the field QCID, and I could have made it any number of type of UDFs, but in this case, it's a multi-line. So you can see there's different options. And it grays that out, I don't know why, but there's different types of UDFs you could do. We kept it simple for the demo. We called it QCID here. And then over here on the validation tab, we told it here's the initials of the quality control inspectors that are valid. So it has to be one of these people. And this is where we would maintain that list of inspector IDs. We've chose to make blank a valid option. We didn't have to, but in this case we did. And we didn't choose to make it a required field, but we could have. So there's the starting point. Now from there, I had to hand this off to the item cost table. So let's highlight that one and take a look there. And this one's a little bit different because now this is going to get the data from the PO part where we received it. So over here is where the action takes place on this one. This one is going to pass the information into QCID in the IM item cost table from this PO receipt tier distribution where it gets captured initially. Now notice I also have it pulling from the inventory transaction distribution. That could be another way that we could have items coming into Sage, or could be used for adjusting items. So whenever designing customizations, you have to consider all the places that data could come into Sage from. We're really just going to focus on the PO side today. So I'm going to show you maybe one or two more tables real quick. So here is the IM lot serial customer recall work. So the reason we're showing this is when you see something that has work on it in Custom Office, that means this is a stock report. And the way these work is when you go into a stock report in Sage and you pull up the screen and you put in your parameters and you hit preview or print, what Sage is doing is it's going out to the raw tables now, and it's grabbing the records that you've requested, and it's putting them into this work table, which then actually generates your report. So the work table, if I'm trying to update a stock report, is what I want to get to for these customizations. Let's take a look at this one. So here's my QCID that we added, and we'll come over here to the data sources, and we'll notice that to get this to here, we had to add it to the IM lot serial transaction history. So that's a table I didn't show you yet, but I also added it there so that we could flow it through to here. This means we should actually be able to see the quality control inspector ID. When we have a recall, we should actually literally be able to see who inspected those lots that are bad. Okay, so there we go. I could have added it and did add it to any number of other tables, but in the interest of time, we're just going to move forward and actually show you the actual transaction and some output. So let's come into here and let's generate a purchase order and receive it in and see if we can actually see that. So we'll get a quick purchase order going here. Doesn't really matter who the vendor is. Get our item in here. This one happens to be a lotted item. So we'll order a case of these guys. And there's our PO. So of course we would normally communicate that over to the vendor, but in the interest of time, we're going to pretend that, it showed up at our docs, we're ready to receive it. So here's our receipt of goods entry. We'll just quickly receive this. There's our memo popping up. We can put an invoice in here if we want to. We don't really care in this case. And we're going to go ahead and receive that. And this little triangle here means that Sage needs something. In this case, the something is a lot. So I will go ahead and provide it the lot information. Let's just go ahead and give it a lot code of 032621-1. That's today's date. I'm using a date code to make it easy to find later. And then let's go ahead and enter the quality control ID of the person who did it. Now, let's try to feed it something that isn't valid. And it's telling me, hey, AAA isn't valid. You can't be AAA. You got to be one of these other people, or you could be a blank. But in this case, let's just give it something valid. Let's go with JGT. That's a valid quality inspector initial, so it took it. We're good. We'll say okay, accept, and let's go ahead and run our update. So when capturing UDF data in this manner, we do have to run the update to record this into our system. So we'll just hit print here. So similar to our other updates, we do have the Sage Paperless Office turned on. So Sage will give us an Adobe document here momentarily, which we will then go ahead and proceed with the update. And we're going to say no today for the back order field report. There's our paperless journal. Looks good to me. Go ahead and run the update. Of course, with our automatic update feature turned on, that'll just push all the way through to the GL like we showed you earlier. Okay, now it's done. Now let's go take a look at a couple reports. So here in inventory, we have the inventory valuation report. This is one of the main reports people use. It shows, what do you have on hand at any point in time? What are the lot numbers? Where is it? And what are they worth? So what I did in this case is I took the standard report and I made a save as setting and I called it QCID. Then what I did is I went into the Crystal Designer through this option and I actually modified my stock report for this setting QCID to add the user-defined information that I added. And then down here, I've got the item that we just received in here. So we'll get a report that'll show us what we have for just this one item. Let's take a look. All right, here we go. So just made a real cosmetic change. As you can see over here is our QCID field, and these are our people that were receiving these that inspected them. Here's our 32621-1, and there's our JGT inspector ID that we entered at the time. So that's great. It worked. Let's try one more really fun one here. So here's the lot serial customer recall report. This is the work table that I actually showed you earlier where I had passed the UDF into there. Let's take a look at this one. So I did a similar thing here where I did a save as, went into the Crystal Designer and modified my report. And now I have a setting called QCID here, predefined again for my item that we're testing with. And we're just going to go ahead and preview the report and see what we get. Now this is demo data, so some of the transactions were done before I added the customization. So these records up here do not show the inspector IDs because they didn't exist at the time those transactions actually occurred. But as I scroll down, I start to see the field show up. And as I go on to page 2, where the more recent transactions are, I see that these are pretty much on every lot that's been done since the customization's been added. So, if these were some of the transactions that were involved, or if it was a particular lot, we would know exactly who inspected that lot. That might give us somebody to go ask some additional questions to. It might lead us to additional documentation and so forth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your tips and tricks for Empower 2021. Let's open it up to questions and answer. Thank you.